And look, whilst we hear people loud and clear on the streets week in, week out, you have to remember that the silence of those who may be too afraid to leave their homes in those circumstances is deafening. This is the first episode of a new set of YouTube explainers called What's in My Inbox. Important point to note. We base the questions based on the emails we're getting from constituents in my inbox. And that means that probably for the first couple of episodes, the questions are likely to reflect the interests of the people who would normally email their local member of parliament. If that's not you and you want to have a conversation about a particular issue, you're going to need to send me an email. You can do so at darren.jones.mp@parliament.uk. This is a constituency video explainer, so this is only open to constituents who live in Bristol Northwest, and your address and details will be checked as part of any questions emailed to us. So let's get to it for this first episode. The first question: why has the government introduced a draconian proposal to give the police new powers to restrict or effectively ban recurring protests? Now, look, the first thing to say is that the government is not banning protests. We live in a democracy. Thankfully, people have the right to peacefully protest on any issue that they wish to protest about. The key point in this question is recurring protests, and importantly, an assessment around the cumulative impact of recurring or repetitive protests. So at the moment, if you're doing a protest and you're marching through somewhere, the police can manage that effectively. If you do not have a marching protest and you protest in the same place maybe every single week, the cumulative impact of, say, 4 of these happening a month on every Saturday, the cumulative impact to the people that live in that area is obviously something that we need to consider. The protests we've seen recently have been quite aggressive protests where we've had people causing hate and division against migrants or asylum seekers or people who were not born and raised here in Britain. And those protests have been, as we've seen on the news, aggressive, unwieldy, and requiring a very significant police response. That is not the way to protest. That is not the way to have a debate about policy questions in our country. And look, whilst we hear people loud and clear on the streets week in, week out, you have to remember that the silence of those who may be too afraid to leave their homes in those circumstances is deafening. And it's important that we're on the side of those people as well as on the side of people who want to peacefully protest. And we mustn't forget either our police officers who work really hard to facilitate peaceful protests and keep our communities safe and secure. But they're also raising the alarm bell on the relentless recurring protests and the impact that's having on police officers. This summer, for example, the Avon and Somerset Police Federation said that officers are emotionally and physically exhausted, and it is not sustainable. So we have to keep the fairness in mind for all of these people, the police officers that staff the protest, the local people that live in our community, and the people who wish to protest. And the powers that the government have been bringing forward, the updates to those powers, is essentially to deliver those outcomes. Okay, second question. Why is the government introducing the Planning and Infrastructure Bill that will weaken decades of environmental protections? Now, the first question there is, what is the Planning and Infrastructure Bill? It's a very big bill. It's kind of the biggest type of bill you can get in Parliament. And there's lots and lots and lots of different changes to essentially speed up the permissioning that's required to build infrastructure or houses across the country. Why are we doing that? We're doing that because we've got a target to build 1.5 million new homes, because lots of people are waiting for housing and affordable housing in our country. But we also know that investment in infrastructure, whether it's railways or bus stops or business infrastructure or energy infrastructure or research capabilities with universities, all of these types of things, they can really drive economic growth. They can make it easier for people to get to work, to start businesses, to be able to employ people and pay taxes and make profits. And all of that activity can kind of speed up growth in our economy, which we're all desperately trying to achieve, because that's the way to improve people's living standards and tackle the cost of living in the long run. So the Planning and Infrastructure Bill is seeking to speed that up. Now, the rub here in the question from constituents is about the attempt to do that, and in the questioner's view, whether that weakens environmental protection. And look, only focusing on the impact of nature and habitats within a proposed building development, so the little area where you might be building some houses, it can sometimes be a kind of misleading view, a kind of cropped photo. So sometimes it's better that you step back from the frame and think about the wider area. And essentially that's what we're trying to do when managing habitats and infrastructure building work. What does that mean? It means that at the moment you might say no to building some houses in a particular place because there might be a particular habitat in that little area. But actually we're going to say, do you know what? If the developer pays to build a new habitat to be able to help nature to be able to survive around the development, then that is a route to being able to manage building and environmental protection. So one of the things the bill is trying to do is to try to help that kind of trade-off to be able to happen, so that you can still protect habitats and natural species in the environment whilst allowing development to happen, as opposed to what happens right now, which is lots of developments just get told, no, you can't proceed with your development. Now look, that example is important, but it's also important to know that of course the government supports green belt, our natural environment. We have lots of great green spaces in and around Bristol that we protect, but in the areas where it's grey belt or brownfield, these are areas that are not the kind of natural environments that you might envisage in your head, but areas that could be developed, like the airfield in Filton, for example. Then we want to be able to facilitate house building and building of community facilities in these areas to support local people. And the fact is that current kind of case-by-case environmental assessments can hold up that work and in the process be ineffective at protecting our natural world and important habitats. And this can be a lose-lose situation for development and for nature. So the Planning and Infrastructure Bill will allow developers to make quick and easy payments that will allow them to get on with the building, with that money then being strategically used to not only stop further decline of our natural world, but to bring about improvement, turning it from a lose-lose situation into what we hope will be a win-win situation for development and for nature. Okay, question 3. Will the government take action to reduce the noise of fireworks? There's a couple of things here. One is fireworks, if they're used in the right way at particular events, whether it's fireworks night or Diwali or other types of annual events, can be brilliant things. The world's most popular science demonstration. They also create opportunities to bring communities together, as we did at Canford Park in Westbury-on-Trim this year, as happens every single year. Having said all of that, I totally recognise the impact this can have on people's pets. We need to make sure that they can't just be used willy-nilly through the year in local communities, and that's why they are regulated. So outside of those key events, like fireworks night and similar events, you can only buy fireworks from a licensed supplier. You can't just buy them in the local shop. Now, the manufacturers of those fireworks also have to think about compliance with laws about noise, and the Health and Safety Executive are kind of responsible for looking at this. So they conducted a test recently of 72 different types of fireworks, and rather than rocketing to the top of the legal threshold, most didn't come close to the limit of 120 decibels of noise. This was reported not long ago in February 2023. I'll pop the link into the description below in case it's of interest. And I think there are some suppliers of fireworks who have produced silent fireworks. So you can see the lights in the sky without the noise that comes with them. And I know some local communities have started to use those instead. So look, that's the end of our first episode of What's in My Inbox. I hope answering these questions has been useful to you to explain the rationale, some of the trade-offs or considerations about government action in these areas. You can type in any feedbacks or comments or questions into the comments box. I'll be available at the time this goes live in the premiere to be able to answer some of those questions. And most importantly, please let us know if you think this is useful for us to do as a constituency office in answering your questions. And as I say, if you're not usually the type of person that will email your MP about something that you care about and you'd like your question to feature in one of these episodes in the future, then make sure you drop me a line at darren.jones.mp@parliament.uk with your question, and hopefully it will appear in a future episode of What's in My Inbox. Thanks so much.